On this episode, two medical mysteries that defied the experts.
It looked like I dipped my body in a hot oil bath.
I was in shock. I didn't know what to think, didn't know how to feel. It was just overwhelming.
It was literally burning up, as if I had been sitting there in a fire with no one to put it out.
When a blistering rash takes over 14-year-old Lindsay Astasio's body, her mother is forced to face a grim reality.
I cannot imagine the pain of having to go through life without her.
Then, with his wife about to deliver their fourth son, Ryan Gleason finds himself fighting for his life.
My hands and feet were completely numb. I couldn't walk like I normally did.
I think he was fearful that he would never see the birth of his son.
I knew this was something terribly wrong, but I didn't know what.
When illness strikes, we look to doctors to give us answers. But what if they can't? For these unlucky patients, diagnosis is a mystery.
In the summer of 2001, 14-year-old Lindsay Astasio didn't have a care in the world.
My life growing up in Pennsylvania, it was great. I had a great childhood.
Lindsay was a happy little girl. She was very active. She was always smiling and running around. She was a sassy little girl, but she was fun-loving, and she was just a bundle of energy. She loved going swimming, and she loved playing games, and she especially loved cooking up concoctions in our kitchen for me.
My relationship with my mom was so close that you couldn't get any closer. We were like two peas in a pod. You couldn't separate us. My mom and I liked going to the beach together, just being in the sun and just being carefree. She was someone I could always go to, no matter what.
But when her parents unexpectedly decide to call their marriage quits, Lindsay suddenly finds it difficult to talk to her mother like she used to.
I started to notice a change. She went through a really difficult time.
I would have periods and episodes of being extremely down and not wanting to talk or see anyone. I almost felt like there was something eating away at me, and the only way I knew how to get it out was by crying.
She was also maturing at that time, and so she just had a lot going on, and when she got to middle school, things started to really fall apart.
When I was at school, out in the hallways, some of my friends came up to me and basically flat out said, "You're not cool enough to hang out with us anymore." And that just broke my heart.
Lindsay would get very frustrated at times, like when we're doing her school homework and I'm trying to help her. And she would start to cry, and there were screaming bouts, and there were times when we just couldn't go on.
I would get home from school and go directly to my room and sleep for hours and not want to be around anyone. So when I started taking all my anger out on her, she realized that we needed to see someone and actually get some more help.
I took her to see a psychologist. The psychologist spent some time talking to Lindsay and found that Lindsay was severely depressed, and she decided to put her on medication.
I didn't quite fully understand how a pill could make me feel better, but the psychologist reassured me that it would help balance out my mood, so I trusted her and I started to take it. I was actually feeling a little bit better, and I had a trip planned to the beach with my friend. My mom did think that spending some time with my friends would definitely help my mood and help me feel better overall. Just being surrounded by other people and having a nice time. When we got to the beach, we immediately got our swimsuits on and went right out sunbathing. And we went to the amusement park, and we even went swimming really late at night, which was a lot of fun. So I had a great first day there.
But the next morning, Lindsay is completely taken aback by a bizarre development.
I noticed pain in my mouth, and there were pretty large blisters in my mouth and on my tongue. I was definitely concerned because I thought that this maybe was because I was in the ocean the night before and maybe there was something in the water that didn't quite go right with me. I was extremely scared and I knew that this was just not something normal. So I thought that I should go to the beach clinic just to get checked out to make sure I was okay. The doctor at the beach clinic told me I just had a virus and it needed to run its course. About 2 hours after I had gone to the clinic at the beach, I had a high fever, my glands were swollen, I had an extremely sore throat, an awful headache, things were just not looking good. There was something in my head telling me that maybe the doctor was wrong.
When I got the phone call from Lindsay, I could tell that she was scared, and so I said that I would drive down right away. I was very worried.
Waiting those 4 hours seemed like 4 years. My symptoms just kept worsening, and I just wanted my mom to get there as fast as possible.
When I first saw Lindsay, she showed me blisters that were in her mouth that were bleeding, and she was very, very itchy. Her eyes were beginning to swell at that point in time.
My eyes were extremely puffy and red and sore to the touch.
We could tell that whatever it was progressing. I didn't know what was happening to her, but I knew that we needed to get some help.
Alarmed, Lori packs Lindsay's bag and they begin the 200-mile drive back to Pennsylvania. But over the next few hours, Lindsay takes a terrifying turn for the worse.
She was literally screaming in the back of the car because the itching was so bad.
My mom tried to reassure me that everything was going to be okay. She told me we were going to be home soon and she would get to the bottom of whatever was going on with me.
When you see your child in pain, you feel totally helpless. There was nothing that I could do to help her at that point.
In a panic, Lori takes Lindsay straight to the local emergency room. And the doctors are clearly shocked by her condition.
You can tell from their face, although they're trying to be very calm. The blisters were all over Lindsay's face at this point, and more so on her eyes.
I was so itchy to the point it was just unbearable. Not just in my eyes, but also on my arms and my legs. And I started to notice little red dots. The little red dots that started appearing on my skin looked like 100 zits all over my body that were extremely itchy.
They were spreading out over her body more than they had been when I picked her up. The blisters were maybe the size of a quarter.
I felt more horrified than I ever had in my entire life about anything. I was so scared, and I still didn't know what was happening to me.
It was continuing to get worse, and immediately you begin to wonder, you know, is this a life-threatening illness? And you're just totally helpless. The doctor came to tell me that they wouldn't be able to treat Lindsay at the medical center because her case was too severe.
At this point, my skin was so burned that it looked like I had just dipped my body in a hot oil bath. It was literally burning up as if I had been sitting there in a fire with no one to put it out.
They didn't know what it was. I was just overwhelmed and thought that she was going to die.
Now, Lindsay is being transferred by helicopter to a burn unit in Chester, Pennsylvania, where critical care surgeon Dr. Linwood Haith is waiting to take over her case.
When I first saw her, she was critically ill. She looked like a mass of purple reddish blisters. Her eyes were red. She had blisters on her face, her chest, her arms, and her lower extremities. And she had significant secretions, which at times made it hard for her to breathe.
While Dr. Haith doesn't know what's triggering the strange blisters, he's certain that Lindsay is in a critical state.
Whatever was happening was affecting her mucous membranes, which means the lining of her nose, her throat, her lungs.
At this point, I needed help to breathe because I couldn't breathe on my own as the skin of my lungs was sloughing off, so they had inserted a ventilator.
There was just a great sense of panic when I saw her hooked up to all this equipment, and when the doctor said that she was going to need to be on a breathing machine. I was just panic-stricken. You know, thoughts go through your head, am I losing my little baby? And at that point, I broke down and cried.
The first time that I saw my mom crying at the side of my bed, it really scared me, and I looked up at her and I asked her, I said, "Mom, why are you crying?" I said, "Am I going to die?"
Over the past 48 hours, 14-year-old Lindsay Astacio has watched more than 100 horrifying blisters surface over her entire body. In a race against time, Dr. Linwood Haith redoubles his efforts and dives into medical journals looking for a lead.
I was worried about significant infection. She was progressively worsening, and I mean worsening very rapidly.
And with each passing hour, Lori Lewis watches helplessly as her daughter fights for her life.
They assured me that they were doing everything that they could. They were not able to assure me that she's going to come through this.
I was in the intensive care unit because it was critical that I be monitored every minute of every day to save my life. The doctors and nurses fought to keep me alive.
I couldn't imagine being without Lindsay. And so I think, you know, I did what I had to do, and that was to say, I know she's going to be okay. At that point, I was terrified. I didn't know what was going to happen. I could see her getting worse, and it was at an alarming rate.
Lindsay had intense pain, and she was medicated to the point she was in a mild coma.
I didn't even know what was going on around me. I wasn't aware of anything.
As Lindsay's health continues to deteriorate, Dr. Haith reviews her medical history, hoping to find some clue.
Dr. Haith asked me about the medication that she had been taking, and I explained that she had started a few days back on the antidepressants.
In that moment, Dr. Haith forms a theory and immediately orders a skin biopsy to confirm his hunch.
Dr. Haith assured me that they were doing everything that they could. I felt like they were much closer, and just praying that there are going to be some answers.
Once we had the biopsy back, we were confident, and the diagnosis of Stevens-Johnson syndrome was made.
Stevens-Johnson syndrome is a rare but deadly allergic reaction to certain medications. In healthy individuals, white blood cells defend the body by attacking infections and foreign substances. But in patients like Lindsay, a medication reprograms the white blood cells to target the mucous membranes and skin. As the top layer of skin starts to die, blisters form.
Stevens-Johnson syndrome is just an overwhelming rash that's uncontrollable and extends to almost 100% of her body. It occurs in less than 1 in a million people. Stevens-Johnson syndrome is usually caused by a drug.
I was really angry when I found out that the antidepressants had caused this in Lindsay. I definitely expected the medication to help her.
When this whole process started, she had flu-like syndrome, and this is a warning stage, and this is probably because the immune system was gearing up in its attack on the skin.
I was absolutely heartbroken and very fearful at the same time. Your heart just is beating out of your chest. I mean, it's hard to respond when you get that kind of information. It's almost like I believe like I was in shock, that I didn't know what to think, didn't know how to feel. It was just overwhelming.
It's now all too clear that the antidepressant caused Lindsay's immune system to go haywire, and it started to assault her body, beginning with the skin in her mouth.
It progressed to the point where most of the skin sloughed off, and it acted like a massive burn. This is one of the more painful types of illnesses because your skin is literally falling off, and nerve endings which reside in the skin and just below the skin are exposed.
It looked like Lindsay had been burnt in a fire, but actually what was happening was her body was burning from the inside out.
Dr. Haith explains that the blisters have been attacking the inner walls of her lungs, and it's just a matter of time before other vital organs begin to shut down.
Stevens-Johnson syndrome is a devastating and potentially fatal disease.
Lori must now face a horrifying reality. Lindsay's chances of survival are only 50-50.
Every now and then, a patient may come into our unit who has a significant sloughing of the skin and could die.
I don't know how I could have possibly gone on without Lindsay, and I cannot imagine the pain of having to go through life without her. But at that point, I really felt that was a possibility.
With the clock ticking, Dr. Haith must wean Lindsay off the antidepressant before he can begin treating her skin.
Once the culprit was removed from Lindsay's system, then the reaction of the body attacking itself will start to cease.
The treatment that they gave her was the same treatment that they would give to a burn patient.
We applied a type of artificial skin to treat her.
It's hard for a mother to watch her daughter go through that kind of pain.
Over the next 2 weeks, the medical team does the best they can to help Lindsay heal.
When she could breathe on her own again, then I felt that I was sure that she was going to be okay.
While Lori is thrilled that Lindsay is finally on the road to recovery, Dr. Haith reminds her that she isn't out of the woods yet.
What happens is there may be early scarring to the lining of the eye, and the lids may scar to the cornea, the lids may scar to the lids themselves, and actually denude the cornea and cause permanent blindness.
I feared for Lindsay's sight, knowing that there was a possibility that she could go blind.
I thought that I might not ever have vision again. I was extremely sad, and I thought that if I did go blind, it would change my life forever. I would never be able to drive. I couldn't walk anywhere, do anything on my own, and this was just extremely sad for me.
Her eyes were stuck closed. They would have to come in and try to pry her eyes open, which made her eyes bleed. It was so painful to see that.
For the past 5 days, 14-year-old Lindsay Astacio has been in the intensive care unit. She's suffering from Stevens-Johnson syndrome, a potentially life-threatening allergic reaction that's caused blisters to form over her entire body, including her eyes and lungs. Over the next 5 weeks, Lindsay slowly begins to show some signs of improvement.
When I was well enough to leave the hospital, I still had lots of scarring over my body, and since all my skin had come off, I looked like a completely different person, and my eyes were swollen and scarred and still extremely painful.
While Lindsay and Lori are deeply grateful to Dr. Haith for saving her life, they can't help but wonder why the disease wasn't caught earlier.
I believe that Stevens-Johnson's is difficult to diagnose because initially it starts out as a rash. Well, rashes are fairly common, but it has an insidious nature and it progresses. people really start to become confused about what it actually is, especially if you haven't seen it before.
A lot of doctors aren't educated on this syndrome and really don't know that much about it. I was extremely fortunate that Dr. Heath was able to diagnose my condition, and that helped save my life.
While Lindsay won't be able to return to school until her skin has completely healed, she and her mother are making up for lost time.
We spent an entire year home together where I did not go to work, and we were always doing things together.
I rested and used moisturizing cream about 3 times a day from head to toe to help my skin heal. And I had to take cold baths because any kind of heat would still burn my skin at that time.
But unfortunately, Lindsay's right eye is permanently damaged.
This was extremely hard for me to come to terms with, that my eyes had changed like this. Even though my vision's not perfect, I am definitely grateful that I can still see.
Today, Lindsay is 22. She's made a remarkable recovery and is optimistic about life.
In the future, I definitely want to work towards being a nurse practitioner so I can help others and just kind of give back in the same way that they've helped me.
I'm just so happy that Lindsay is alive today, and I will always be there to support her.
My advice for people searching for a diagnosis would be to immediately go to your doctor and don't waste any time thinking that it's probably nothing. I would say thank you to Dr. Heath, because you're the reason that I'm still here today.
Next, Ryan Gleason's body begins to rapidly shut down, and the young father is forced to face a terrifying reality. He may not live to welcome his 4th child into the world. In the fall of 1996, Ryan Gleason was starting his 2nd year of high school near Lake Superior in Michigan. And that November, he was introduced to a girl who would change his life.
When I first met Annette, I was 15 years old, she was 16, and as soon as I saw her, I wanted to be with her. She was beautiful.
Ryan and I met when I was a junior at a local school near his. He was a sophomore. And for him, he tells me all the time it was love at first sight, and I feel the same way.
By the time they graduated, Ryan and Annette knew they wanted to spend the rest of their lives together.
Annette and I got married. It was in August of 2004. It was a beautiful wedding. Annette and I envisioned probably having around 3 or 4 children. Our first child, Anthony, was born in September of 2005.
The minute that Anthony was born, I looked up at Ryan and I could just see tears pouring down his face at how proud he was. Our second son, Parker, was born in 2007. He came a lot quicker than we had expected, but we were thrilled to have him.
Our third child, Braden, was born in February 2009. Once again, we were both excited to welcome another child into our family.
Ryan and Annette cope very well with having a house full of boys. Seeing Ryan as a father is just a wonderful thing. He is being just the type of father that I wanted him to be and that he can be.
Living at our house with 3 boys got to be interesting. When I found out that Annette was pregnant with our 4th, we weren't actually expecting that, but at the same time, we were excited.
As Annette's due date approaches, Ryan couldn't be happier. He couldn't be healthier either, other than a lingering sinus infection. But then, one morning in late September, Ryan wakes up with a strange feeling.
I woke up and I just kept telling Annette that something wasn't right. I felt run down. I had a headache. I was thinking that maybe it was caused by my sinus infection.
And I insisted he stay home, and he said, no, I think I'm gonna just try to go to work.
At that time, I was working at a local mine, operating forklifts. I didn't feel right to go to work, but I didn't want to miss out on the money because I knew that we were having a newborn coming.
When Ryan came home that evening, he said his headache had gotten worse. He was very tired.
I decided to go to bed and figured maybe the next day I'd feel better.
But when he wakes up the next morning, Ryan is startled by an unnerving incident.
I happened to look at the ceiling fan, and I noticed I was seeing two of them. I looked at her, and I saw her head, and then it split into the left side, where I would see two of them. I knew something was wrong.
As soon as Ryan told me that he was seeing the double vision, I got very panicky. I didn't know if he was suffering from something severe.
Annette races Ryan to the closest ER. And within the hour, he undergoes a series of tests.
The ER doctor examined me, and he didn't really know what was going on. And then they admitted me into the hospital. I did not imagine when I first woke up being in a hospital hooked up to IVs.
When they said Ryan was getting admitted, I knew that this was going to be a little bit more serious, and I became very nervous for him.
While the medical team continues to perform test after test, Ryan is blindsided by a terrifying new symptom.
My hands and feet were completely numb and had that pins and needles sensation. I couldn't walk like I normally did. I noticed I lost my balance.
And he was having trouble walking, swaying from side to side. And he was complaining that his hands felt very numb.
They pretty much ran every test they could think of to figure out what was going on. The doctors could not give me an answer on why this was happening. I just couldn't go on like that. I knew this was something terribly wrong, but I didn't know what.
Just 2 days ago, Ryan Gleason was playing in the snow with his children. But now, he's barely able to move his arms and legs. Complicating matters, he's seeing double. 12 hours after being admitted to the hospital, the physician overseeing his case suspects he knows what's going on.
The doctor walked in and mentioned that Ryan may be suffering from multiple sclerosis.
Multiple sclerosis is a disease that affects the nerves and muscles and can result in severe loss of function and mobility.
I know it affects the body quite a bit. I got a little nervous. I got scared. Annette broke down, and she just sat there and she couldn't believe that we were going through this, especially her being pregnant.
My heart started to break for Ryan immediately because I knew that it could prevent him from being active. And at some point, he wouldn't be able to go outside. I didn't know if he needed to be pushed in a wheelchair. I knew from that moment on that this was going to be very difficult.
When I was in the hospital, I held a lot of my emotions in. I did not believe that we were going through this.
Ryan was laying in the hospital bed, and I surprised him and had our 5-year-old son show up. Ryan broke down crying, and it was the hardest thing to see.
When I first saw my firstborn, Anthony, I just hugged him. He asked me, Daddy, you gonna be okay? And at that point, I couldn't give him an answer.
For a 5-year-old, he knew his dad was really, really ill. Anthony lifted his spirits, and it was wonderful to see Ryan smiling. And from then on, I think he was ready to figure out what was going on.
To confirm the diagnosis, Ryan undergoes an MRI. And within hours, the results are in. Ryan is not suffering from MS.
I wanted to have some answers to figure out what was going on.
Completely baffled, the medical team suggests that Ryan head straight to the Mayo Clinic, 400 miles away in Rochester, Minnesota.
Mayo Clinic was about 9 hours from our home, and I knew my husband could barely walk to the car, much less sit in a vehicle for 9 hours. I feared what could happen to him just in that time span. When I asked Ryan's mother to come to Mayo Clinic, she was there for us as soon as she could be.
This mysterious illness was taking over my son's body. His hands and his feet were slowly getting paralyzed, and he had the double vision. I was just praying and hoping that the doctors at Mayo Clinic would diagnose him quickly and help him improve his condition.
I was worried about my symptoms, but the wheels started turning. Is this going to be covered? Is this whole thing going to put us in debt? A lot of things were going through my mind.
We were fearful of what we may hear, but at the same time at peace, knowing we were going somewhere that was probably going to give us an answer to what was going on.
The drive was very stressful. Annette was just so brave, and she just kept plugging along and just hoping that we were going to get there as fast as we could.
When we first arrived at Mayo, the first doctor we saw was the ENT. He did different tests to see what was actually causing his vision problems. He couldn't find out what was going on.
While Ryan is waiting for the next specialist to begin her exam, a horrifying new symptom begins to emerge.
When Ryan was laying in the hospital bed, he sounded almost as if he had a speech impediment. He would try to rephrase things and try to fix it, but nothing seemed to work. So I knew that something in his body was getting worse.
I could definitely tell that there was change in my voice. I couldn't pronounce like D's. They sounded more like N's. I saw on Annette's face, she looked very concerned.
I became more and more scared every minute. I was 7 months pregnant, so it was an extremely emotional situation for us. I think he was fearful that he would never see the birth of his son.
Over the past 5 days, Ryan Gleason's body has been rapidly shutting down. He's seeing double, he can't walk, and now he's barely able to speak. As Ryan begins to wonder what's going to happen next, a series of specialists perform a battery of tests, hoping to pinpoint what's triggering his sudden decline.
From there, I went to a speech therapist where he ran me through a number of tests. Then I went to a physical therapist where they checked my balance. They wanted to see how well I could walk. And then they hooked me up to an electric pulse, and they would shock my feet to my legs, to my hands, all the way to my arms, and even on my face, around my eyes, to determine if my nerves were firing. And they also put pins into my skin to see if my muscles were working correctly.
He determined that he was suffering from something neurological.
Immediately, neurologist Dr. Margarita Maloney takes over the case.
Ryan is a young man, so all these symptoms were overwhelming for him. There were different neurological conditions that may cause Ryan's symptoms. He had already a brain MRI, and it was important to get that MRI to be sure that there were no tumors in the back of the brain. Ryan had a CAT scan of his chest, abdomen, and the pelvis. The reason for that was I wanted to be sure that no tumor was missed in such a young person.
As Dr. Maloney meticulously analyzes the images, she can't see anything out of the ordinary. Next, she orders a test to see if Ryan is suffering from an infection.
The lumbar puncture is used to drain spinal fluid. The way the lumbar puncture is performed, a needle is inserted in the spinal canal and the spinal fluid is drained, and that fluid is used for testing.
When the findings come in, Dr. Maloney knows exactly what's causing Ryan's body to shut down.
Ryan's clinical symptoms and neurological examination, and with the help of some test result, I diagnosed Ryan with Miller-Fisher syndrome.
Miller-Fisher syndrome is a rare autoimmune disease of the nerves. In healthy individuals, when harmful bacteria or a virus invades the body, antibodies fight them off. But in patients like Ryan, For some unknown reason, the antibodies not only fight them off, they begin to attack the nerves as well.
In Ryan's case, Miller-Fisher is triggered by a preceding infection. In the majority of the cases, an upper respiratory infection, such as a cold or any sinus infection.
I started to feel very nervous, knowing that my body was attacking itself instead of trying to fight the infection, and it worried me quite a bit.
When they first used the word Miller-Fisher syndrome, I immediately got scared because with the word syndrome, I just did not know what to expect.
Dr. Maloney goes on to explain that Ryan's immune system had been working overtime to fight the sinus infection he developed 10 days ago. And then it started to assault the nerves in his eyes.
Ryan was experiencing double vision because the nerve going to the eye muscle were not working properly.
Next, the rogue antibodies targeted the nerves that controlled Ryan's hands and feet.
The nerves are important to provide us with information about the positions of our body parts in space, and therefore he was experiencing the unsteadiness.
If I was not diagnosed, I could have been paralyzed.
Ryan had difficulty with his voice because also the nerves that were going to the muscle in the soft palate were weak.
In many cases, the disease spreads like a wildfire and within hours destroys the nerves in the lungs.
There are cases of patients who had developed difficulty and inability to breathe.
While Ryan and Annette are relieved to finally know what's wrong, they're struggling to grasp the magnitude of the potentially deadly disease.
A lot of things ran through my mind. I wanted to know if this was something that I was going to live with the rest of my life. Is this something that's going to affect my children?
I was fearful for anything they were about to say.
Over the past 2 weeks, 29-year-old Ryan Gleason has experienced a terrifying constellation of symptoms. He's barely able to see, move his legs, or even speak. Now, the father of 3 has just learned that he's suffering from Miller-Fisher syndrome, a degenerative autoimmune disease of the nerves that can be fatal.
I went into panic mode. I never had heard of Miller-Fisher syndrome before. What if I wasn't able to take the kids to the park, run around, play tag?
Fortunately, there are effective treatments for the condition. And Dr. Margarita Maloney wastes no time starting Ryan on the medication.
Ryan received a 5-day course of IVIG. He had an infusion daily for 5 days. IVIG stands for intravenous immunoglobulin. They are a blood product. Essentially, these antibodies can block the bad antibodies that attack the nerves.
As Ryan undergoes the first round of treatment, he prays it will work. More than anything, he wants to be there when his 4th child is born just 2 months from now.
By the 2nd day of my treatments with the IVIG, I noticed the numbness in my hands and feet starting to subside. And Annette also noticed that my voice was getting easier to understand. And to me, it seemed like this is really working. I felt very confident, and I felt like my body was starting to come back to normal.
When he started to finally be able to walk without assistance, he was feeling more at peace with himself. He was feeling stronger. He was feeling more prideful because he knew he'd be able to play with his kids again. All of his fears started to slowly go away.
Amazingly, within 5 days, Ryan is ready to head home, where his children are waiting for him.
When I left Mayo, I still had a little bit of numbness in my hands and feet. My voice was pretty much back to normal, but I still had the double vision. And even though the nerves heal, it's a slow process.
The boys were relieved to see their dad walk in the door. They were overwhelmed with happiness. They hugged him, were excited.
Now we could focus on her pregnancy making sure that the baby's healthy and welcome our fourth boy into this life.
2 months after we returned from Ryan's visit at Mayo, we had given birth to our fourth son. We were so excited when Bryant was born. He just brought that peace to us. His face helped us to just stay positive. When Ryan first got to hold his son, he just started crying, and he was so happy and so proud.
The first time I held him, I had to think back of all the hospital visits and where we are today. It was quite a relief to finally have all this over and to have him in my arms.
While Ryan is thrilled to have been able to welcome his son into the world, he can't help but wonder why no other doctor recognized his condition any sooner.
I think it took so long because there are a number of autoimmune disorders. So, I mean, it could have been a number of things.
Today, Ryan is back on his feet, chasing his children like he used to. While his vision is not 100%, he's hopeful that one day he'll be back to his old self.
As soon as my vision goes back to 100%, I want to watch my kids grow because I know it's going to happen fast.
I am so thankful that my husband was able to stay as strong as he could and to be able to keep his spirits up knowing he had a family to raise and a wife to be with.
I'm very proud of him, and I just love him so much. And I'm so happy that he's getting back to his normal self and that we can just go on with everyday life and see those 4 little boys grow up.
What I've learned through this whole experience is you can't take life for granted. You have to take each day and just cherish it as much as you can and try to spend as much time with your family as you possibly can, because I know that I'm just thankful for being here.